Hello, welcome back to the Neighborhood Conversations, where we have inclusive conversations with persons who have amazing interests with inclusiveness. And it's really good to have the amazing Jarvis Googoo today, a Mi'kmaq educator, someone who is passionate, community driven, if I can say that as well. Jarvis, welcome to the Neighborhood Conversations. How are you?
Well, thank you very much. I'm good. Temperatures just dropped a bit here, so it's a little chilly now. But I say it's still summer, so I'm still wearing my shorts.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. And what land are you coming from today? I think it's really good to recognize that.
Oh, thank you. I am coming from Mi'kmaq, which is the land of the Mi'kmaq. It is the First Nations people in Eastern Canada. So when I say Eastern, I do mean Eastern, which is the Atlantic region. So that's where I am coming from.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I am coming from Mi'kmaq as well. And so it's really good to recognize the land which we meet today. I want to acknowledge that this recording will be played on Truth and Reconciliation Day. And so I want to have a conversation today with Jarvis about what is truth and reconciliation. I think let's go into the conversation to what is Truth and
Mhm.
Reconciliation Day, and why do we celebrate it? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, big story, little story, long story, but a great story.
Yeah.
So basically, it is the recognition of a day. It's one of the calls to actions from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's final report, Call to Actions, to have a statutory holiday, if we can call it a holiday, a day to commemorate, to reflect upon, and remember. Uh, you know, we all like to praise Canada, but at the same time, Canada's got a racist past. And it's to recognize the legacies of the Indian residential school system and the impact it has had on Indigenous children who have become adults, who have become elders, and the intergenerational trauma that gets passed on from children to grandchildren, so on and so forth. And it's about learning from the past, what not just what these schools were, but why were these schools, this whole system, why was it created in the first place? And basically, they wanted to get rid of what I will call the quote unquote the Indian problem. They
Mhm.
didn't want to deal with Indians issues, affairs, healthcare, everything. So the intent was, you know what? If you get rid of them, by assimilating them. How do you assimilate them? Basically, you make them white. Get rid of their language. Get rid of their culture. Get rid of whatever identity that makes them them. So yeah, there's a whole thing. There were some laws on grown ups, but they figured the best effective way to go after it was to go after children because there's no way you can pass on your culture, heritage, and language if the children don't grow up learning it. And because if it's gone, how what are they going to pass on and carry? Where are they going to carry on, send to further generations? So basically, there's the system, for a lack of a better term, I would say it failed,
Yeah.
but sadly we're still dealing with the legacies of intergenerational systemic racism from these schools. So to work on reconciliation, on peace and friendship, rectifying this, addressing this, dealing with this, making it better, the thing is you got to learn what brought us here in the first place.
Right.
So the big key is Canada has to learn about these systems, these schools that were in place,
Mhm.
in addition to the other racist history
Right.
that we've had here in Canada. And with Truth and Reconciliation Day, it's like, okay, there's many issues of racism that happened here. So what we're going to focus on today, the legacies of the Indian residential school system, and the effects it continues to have today. We see impacts with education, attainment, with overrepresentation in the criminal justice system.
Right.
People in prison, apprehension of children, child welfare services, boil water advisories. Uh, you know, this is just the legacy of colonialism, thinking Indigenous people cannot govern, self-determine, think, work for themselves. So we are going to tell you how to do this.
Yeah.
And when I'll say when you superimpose, it's not a good thing. You take away our rights, our lands, our resources, And, it leaves us in a bad situation.
Yeah.
And of course, going back to your question of, what is Truth and Reconciliation Day? It's, it's something I believe that should be going on year round, but I guess I would say it's an extra day to think about and learn about these systems, these things I just mentioned about, but getting into more detail about them, and then asking yourself afterwards, which I think, is the question that was the last question on the email. What can people do about it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And Jarvis, how do you define peace and reconciling? Like, how do you define that as an individual? I know I didn't add this question, but
Sorry.
I'm curious. I'm a conversationalist, so I try to
Yeah.
pick in questions. So how do you define peace and reconciling, um, in this way? Yeah.
Uh, for me, a start, big start, would be, acknowledging, understanding, and knowing that the whole thing with the system, the old system, like residential schools are closed now, and formally they've been off the books since only 2014. The last school closed in the late 1990s.
Hmm.
So what does it? How do you reconcile that? With peace and everything. And to me, the first thing is acknowledging this wasn't um, a bad school system. It was a bad school system, and knowing and understanding these schools were racists. These schools, the intent was to just eliminate, erase anything that made an Indigenous person Indigenous, regardless of what First Nations you actually belong to, or you are that you are a member of. Federally, this thing was from east to west, and objective was assimilation, the erase, and
Yeah.
you know cultural genocide
Yeah.
to get rid of the existence of what is Mi'kmaq, to get rid of the existence of what is Coxsackie, to get rid of the existence of what is Blackfoot. Regardless of what First Nations it was, get rid of the language, culture, heritage, spirituality, anything and everything. Long hair, your clothes. Once that's all gone, you as a people are gone. As
Hmm.
with cultural genocide. So going back to your question about what does it look like, first things first, to acknowledge these weren't just schools that failed to teach how to properly read. These are racist places. And to say, hey, this was a horrible, bad problem. Yes, Canada, we want to brag we have a human rights record. We want to brag we have a charter. That's fine and dandy. But you gotta understand, we've had these racist policies in the past here. We need to acknowledge that. Then, in rectifying that with reconciliation, we need to talk about and address,
Yeah.
how do we tackle it? How do we make it better?
Yeah.
We've had a serious, horrible problem.
Yeah.
Um, Basically, just before Confederation, early relations between Indigenous people and European colonialists were ones of nation to nation. Like, at least here speaking in Mi'kmaq, I do not speak for other First Nations out west.
No.
Here in Mi'kmaq,
Right.
our relationships with the Crown, you're British, we are Mi'kmaq. We will enter into treaties based upon that premises. We are the Mi'kmaq nation. You are the British Crown. And then, these treaties are signed and agreed to in the 1700s. Then a lot of history happened. More settlers came in, more loyalists from not Britain, I'm sorry, more loyalists post American Revolution
Hmm.
came to Nova Scotia. I believe after the American Revolution, about 30,000 settlers from the loyalists in the United States, the colonies, came up here. And that's a lot of people to, cramp into this area of Mi'kmaq and displace the Mi'kmaq people who were here and taking away what little land that was already taken away from us, and then begin the process of stuffing us onto reserves.
Right.
So going back to the question, how to deal with that, many, many things,
Yeah.
but going with the topic of reconciliation, the big thing is the calls to action. There are
Yeah.
96 of them. Within that, some have been implemented, some are yet to be acted upon, some are a work in progress. Um, and of course, because of what September 30th is now today in Canada,
Right.
one of those calls to actions there, acknowledging this is a day we need to set aside to educate ourselves, to talk about the TRC, to talk about the legacy of racism, and to work towards it. I could go on all day about
Yeah.
the 96 calls to action. We won't do that,
Yeah.
but it's at least a starting point vis-a-vis, what September 30th is about.
I look forward to my family's security in the future. That's the main goal as a father.
The empowerment from changing careers has really just made me want to get out of bed in the morning.
I'm looking forward to growing my business. So I want to hire people like I was hired. I want to give guys that chance.
Il me fera plaisir de continuer à travailler avec les immigrants francophones en Nouvelle-Écosse.
I'm looking forward to the financial freedom that I never had before.
Yeah, yeah. That's really important. Wow, the call to action. I know you say you can go over that in a spiel of an hour, and
Yeah.
we're gonna invite you back on to dive deeper into those conversations, because I feel like this education is needed to be a continuous wake up call for political leaders and people who are in power to make change and to be a part of
Mhm.
that change for sure. You speak about cultural genocide. I want you to touch a bit about that. What does that mean to
Mhm.
give our listening audience a better,
Yeah.
clearer definition? Yeah.
Yeah. So it's spelled out into the TRC's executive summary. I'm actually it's when the TRC came out. I know a lot of folks are always saying, go ahead and read it. It's thick. It's many volumes, and we're talking thousands of pages. And I am going to answer the question, so I want to give you a side history.
Yeah. Yeah. Go
And
ahead.
when I read, I'm a vast majority of the time I am a paper reader. I need a physical book. I like making highlights,
Same.
tab.
Same here. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was looking for an entire printed, bounded copy of the TRC, and I looked for years for it.
Right.
I found one publisher out west who was able to sell, bind it all, everything
Right.
for $700. I was like, mm. And so I'm talking to you on an iPad, and
Yeah.
I said, you know what? I don't like to be an e-reader,
Right.
but I kind of have a choice. So I downloaded the entire TRC, and I'm actually in the midst of reading it.
Yeah.
So I'm at I started off with the summary of it before I get into more details. In it is the definition of cultural genocide. I'm not going to recite it verbatim with a textbook definition, but it goes to a bit what I said earlier. Genocide in of itself, just the killing off of people. Cultural genocide is basically eliminating, killing off, erasing
Yeah.
the characteristics and the things that make a culture a culture. So, as a Mi'kmaq person, I'm not fluent, but I speak a good amount of the Mi'kmaq language. Our culture, we use birch bark trees. We made baskets. We not made birch bark trees. We made birch bark canoes out of birch bark trees.
Yeah.
Our wigwams, our songs, our language, our spirituality, our spiritual practices, things that our culture, our events of solidarity, which is how we mourn our loved ones after they passed. All these things and many more are what make Mi'kmaq people Mi'kmaq. Going elsewhere, I understand, and I apologize to any West Coast Indigenous listeners, as I understand, West Coast of North America. So I'm talking the West Coast along the Pacific. As I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, the culture, a big part of it, the carving of totem poles. Like we learned about Mongo Martin when I was in elementary school. The Sundance, something I understand as traditionally that of the Plains. And that's their culture. That's what makes them unique. We as Mi'kmaq, we have our things that make us unique. So with cultural genocide in the school systems, these residential school systems wanted to erase that and eliminate that. They say stop learning language. Speak French, speak English. If you speak your native language, we will beat you up for it. Your spirituality is wrong. Be a good white Christian. Learn about Jesus and stuff. don't be worshiping the sun or the ground or whatever First Nations culture worships or practices to the schools, all out the window. You learn English and French. You learn what we learn. You be a good Christian person. We're going to work with the missionaries, and we're going to enroll the system to assimilate you. And to me, it's like you've erased and gotten rid of what made us unique as Mi'kmaq. You try to erase and get rid of what makes Blackfoot Blackfoot, so on and so forth with other nations across this land. And to me, when you erase what makes us unique, you've committed cultural genocide. You've gotten rid of what makes us stand out as unique individuals, unique First Nations, east to west there.
Mhm.
So that would point, and I would say would fulfill the definition of what is cultural genocide. You're not necessarily killing the child per se, but of course, as we know, children died at these schools. We
Yeah.
know about the stories. We are learning about the stories of the
Right.
mass graves, the TRC documents. Children died at these schools.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, that's a part of the genocide right there. Get rid of culture. It's the whole process of cultural genocide. And it's almost like, well, we couldn't, it was like the Fed said back in the day, we can't make laws per se to just go to the reserves and kill people.
Yeah.
But we're going to make a laws that at least curb their lifestyle, curb their culture, hurt their culture, that attack them.
Yeah.
So, and the way we have historically seen, living conditions on reserve in Canadian history because of colonialism. I'm like, well, you know what? People are dying here too. It's not. System's not good for us. So I would argue, like, yeah, that's a genocide right there in and of itself.
Yeah. Wow. Wow, that's a good history knowledge lesson. Jarvis, I appreciate you sharing that. It leads to my next question that you target towards the residential schools. When did the residential schools start to have an impact on the Aboriginal people?
Uh, I probably will say the day the first one opened up, and
Mm,
I'll even say even the day, even before the first one opened up, because with the system itself, the thing is the whole intent of assimilation,
yeah,
the idea of all right, you stop speaking Nishka, speak English.
yeah,
You stop speaking Haudenosaunee. No, start speaking French. And when you start attacking our language, which is a very fundamental core to a culture, to me that was the start of attempted to wipe us out vis-a-vis cultural genocide of our people.
right,
And I'm thinking even of the time the very first child was apprehended by the Canadian state
yeah,
and saying, "All right, children, you're off to Indian residential school. We are physically going to just take your child from your parent in your community, and if the parent puts up a fuss, we'll arrest you.
yeah,
We'll throw you in jail.
yeah,
So we're going to take your child. Sometimes we'll lie and say, oh, your children are going to learn English and French, so they'll get a grade 12 diploma. So
right,
they'll be very successful and can help you out. The teachers were underpaid. The teachers were poorly qualified. The
right,
teachers taught in very, very overcrowded classrooms. How's a child supposed to learn in these schools?
wow,
So going back to when it first started taking effect, I would say the moment someone came up with the idea of it and how that started taking the first child away, that's going to affect the child's parents
that's
to
sad.
say, we're just going to take your kid.
Yeah,
You're doing a horrible job.
yeah,
Why do you think you're doing a horrible job? I'll say, because you're not white. So you just presume you're a bad parent.
wow.
Yeah.
Wow, and that's sad. Like just hearing this it may, and I've been learning more about truth and reconciliation.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just so sad just to hear about what's happened. And we're still seeing more things come out of the residential schools and stuff like that, which is
Mm-hmm.
it's just sad for sure. Today,
Yeah.
today is Truth and Reconciliation Day. What can people do in order to reflect and educate themselves today as they continue to move forward? Yeah.
Um, Lots of things.
Yeah, there's lots of things for sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
I remember a statement that the former chair, Justice Murray Sinclair, stated a couple of years ago. I think it was pre-pandemic,
Right.
and I believe the same question, paraphrase, was put to him that you just asked me, and he said, "Read the TRC, all of it. If you don't have the time or the resources to read the TRC, read a summary about the TRC. If you can't read the summary of the summaries. If you can't read that, read the calls to action.
Yeah.
If you can't read that, talk to someone who may have read it, or talk to someone about the calls to action." And I'm a firm believer myself in big steps or little steps. Have you ever seen the movie Shawshank Redemption?
I haven't actually, but I should
Okay, I'm
watch
not.
it. I'm gonna watch
Uh,
it.
okay, I'm not going to ruin it. There's a great ending. It's a shock and fun ending. So I'm not going to ruin it for your listeners.
Okay.
Yeah, but I'll say this: if I had to, how would I
Well,
say
explain
this?
it.
So,
Still explain it because
okay,
maybe the
all
listeners
right,
already listen. Well, maybe I'm
okay.
not one. Yeah, you go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, all right. Spoiler alert: Shawshank Redemption. So the guy is wrongfully convicted of murder, so he's sentenced to prison, and he vows to escape from the prison.
Right.
And so he asks his friend Red, played by Morgan Freeman, "Get me a pickaxe. I want to dig myself way out of this prison." So Morgan Freeman laughs at him. "Yeah, you're going to dig yourself out of prison. Sure, got it." And he says, "Get me a poster." "Sure, okay." So I think for almost 20 years with a pickaxe, every night, he chips away at a wall in his prison. It took him 20 years. He made a hole big enough to escape and to get out of the prison there, and and he's free. And Morgan Freeman's character is like, wow, he did it.
Right.
I laughed at him and I said, it's going to take you, I don't know, 50 years, 100 years or whatever. He said, no, you did it in 20. It took a while, but you did it. And like realistically, what would have been faster? A bulldozer. What would have been faster? A key to the cell.
Yeah. Yeah.
A lot of things could be faster, but the way I saw his character, I'm like, you know what? It took little steps. It took you a long time, but you got through it. And for me, I say when it comes to reconciliation, what people can do, I always say, no step is too small.
Yeah.
Likewise, I always say no step is too big either. When I remember, so what I did is lobbied my, I don't want to say lobbied, that's a harsh term, but I reached out to my member of parliament.
Right.
In the past, even before pandemic, about having a day to recognize as per the calls to action of reconciliation and reflection on the legacies of Indian residential schools. And I've reached out to my MLA as well to have it recognized provincially. And to me, that's a major step. That's a
Right.
major, because it's one of the calls to action. It is major.
Yeah.
But at the same time, this podcast that we are speaking on right now, maybe it's Girl Guides, maybe it's an elementary school in the city. When they email me or call and they ask, can you come speak to our group? Can you come speak to our class? That's not a call to action.
No.
It's not in there specifically. Girl Guides, reach out. No, it's just something I do because they have asked me, and that means so much to me. So I would say, if they're available, if you're in Mi'kmaq, see if you can find out, and don't be shy to ask. Speak to Mi'kmaq educators. Ask them if they would come in. I love coming in to schools. I love talking to youth. Same time, I talk to engineering firms. I talk to health regulatory bodies, this podcast, whomever, about talk about the legacy of Indian residential schools. Sometimes I'll just talk about Mi'kmaq law. By training, I am a lawyer.
Yeah.
I'm still a member of the bar. I love talking about the law.
Yeah.
It's boring, but law and legislation had a major impact on not just Mi'kmaq people, but all Indigenous peoples across the land. So for me, that's kind of a personal interest of mine. I love talking about treaties.
Yeah.
It's kind of fun.
Yeah.
I'm a little too textbook on them, I think, but
Yeah.
I love talking about history. I'm an agnostic person. I don't know a lot about spirituality. I'm not very big into folklore, but there are Mi'kmaq educators out there who are and who can, provide that as well too. And the way I see it, whether you're 7 or 8 years old in like Boy Scouts or Girl Guides, whether you're in junior high, or whether you're you know the CEO of an engineer firm, or whether you're the director of a health regulatory body. The way I see it, never too young, never too old, never too busy to learn.
Right.
There are educators out there. Ask them to come in,
Yeah.
ask them if they can speak.
Yeah.
And because it's an opportunity for you and the folks that you are with to
Yeah.
learn something. And I like to think, I spoke to a school last year. The school it was just in Timberlea there, and I think they had about 60 students I spoke to. And part of me is like, what? Of those 60 students, how many are going to continue to keep having an interest in Indigenous issues and Mi'kmaq rights? Maybe, they go to university. Maybe whatever papers they pursue, classes they take up, they're like, what? That speaker meant something to me. I want to learn more about Mi'kmaq history. Maybe they want to go into med school or law school, with an intent to say, I want to do my part with reconciliation,
Right.
whether it's advocating for rights
Right.
or providing culturally appropriate, culturally sensitive, culturally aware healthcare in our Mi'kmaq communities within Mi'kma'ki. I would say whatever it is, it's a step towards reconciliation.
Yeah.
It may seem like baby steps, but I always say, what? Baby steps lead to walking. Walking leads to running. Running leads to the end of the race.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
That's powerful. Can you say that?
Thank
Can
you.
you say that last quote again? Can you say that if you could remember? Can you just say it again?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No step is too big or too small because baby steps lead to walking. Walking leads to running. Running leads to the end of the race.
Wow.
And we're all going to get there. And, maybe it's a never-ending race. Maybe that's what reconciliation's an ongoing process.
Yeah.
But the important thing is you are still moving forward. And that's all that counts.
Yeah. And that's all that counts for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate you coming on, Jarvis, to just advocate and to share and to continue to educate us on. And I believe the time is now for us to take action. The time is now for us to move forward and to get on government table to change those policies around, to review those call to action and see where we can act now. Like you say, and there's no excuse. We have no excuses. There's no excuses. I feel like we always make up the excuse. But the time is now for us to act. I before we go, I want to close by touching on people wear orange shirts on this day. Can we speak to why every Canadian international person, any person who is wearing that shirt today, let them know, what does this mean by you wearing this shirt?
Yeah. The story behind it is, in a way, it's not an old story. It took place in the 1970s. So in the historical context of Indian residential schools, it's more of a recent one. It was about a young woman, I believe, out west in British Columbia. On her first day of school, she had an orange shirt that was very special to her. I think her mother bought it for her or gave it to her, someone in her family. And the shirt was taken away from her. And this left her very sad. And there was a campaign for September 30th, I believe, to be Orange Shirt Day because of when you take something a child loves and you take it away from them. As an adult, I take away your pen or whatever, you're probably going to get annoyed. But as a child, that could be traumatizing.
Right. Yeah.
Especially an adult in a position of power doing that. I understand that, this woman's still alive.
Yeah.
She continues to advocate and be very vocal on behalf of her fellow Indian residential school survivors. So, the orange shirt, to me, it's a big thing because it raises awareness of it. And the little step I like about it is if there's somebody amongst you that day who doesn't know about the Indian residential school systems, who doesn't know even what orange shirts are and what they mean. They see the shirt, and the big thing I hope what they do is they ask.
Yeah.
They ask, somebody speaks to them about it, and then they educate them about it, and then that person walks away thinking, wow, this was horrible. What can I do to continue to do my part with it? Being a spillover effect, move on and moving forward.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. That's powerful.
Thank you.
Jarvis, Googoo, everyone. Thank you so much for coming on to the Neighborhood Conversations, where we have so much inclusive education awareness, and these education awareness leads to action to allow other people to hear how to move forward onto different tables. Thank you so much for coming on once again, Jarvis. We always try to end with a lasting quote and a lasting tip of the day. And Jarvis Googoo, I'm going to allow you to give us the lasting tip, lasting quote or quote of the day that will help people to move forward in action.
When you take time to learn about Indian residential schools and the legacy of colonialism in this land, and trying to do your part with respect to reconciliation, any gesture, any step, nothing's too big, nothing's too small. It's all important. And we say every child matters. I say every step matters. Move it forward, push forward. If and always approach it with an open mind. Be willing to learn, because there are people out there who are willing to help and willing to educate and work with you towards peace and friendship and truth and reconciliation.
Jarvis Googoo, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to this episode. Ladies and gentlemen, audience, have a great day, and we will see you at the next episode.
Thank you.
This podcast is funded by the Government of Nova Scotia.